It was long speculated that a ship belonging to Harry Hudson had been built upon during the construction of the World Trade Center in the 1960s. The ship was discovered during excavations for the construction of the structure in the 60s, but it wasn't officially reported. Instead, the ship would wait another 50 years in the darkness before officially being brought back into the light in 2010. Wait till you hear this. Henry Hudson had been looking for a northwest passage in the 1600s, and the area, now the financial district of Lower Manhattan, was once this water channel. It was once part of the Hudson River, so named for Henry Hudson. And when New Yorkers used the Hudson as a place to dump waste as landfills, it grew the landmass of the city so much that they are now able to have a thriving financial district on this area. So when the excavations discovered the parked ship there in the 1960s, in a sealed room by the way, it really wasn't that unusual for the surveyors, since they already knew what the area consisted of. But nonetheless, it became a bit of an urban legend that Henry Hudson's ship was sealed in a lit room in the basement of the World Trade Center. Fast forward to 2010, and for a brief moment, it seemed that the story could actually be true. And incredibly, it didn't fall that short. From the ruins of Ground Zero, roots would emerge to America's past. The historic discovery of the ship has been linked to other buildings constructed from the same timbers. It dates to 1773 and was built from growth forests in Pennsylvania. Independence Hall, for example, in Pennsylvania, is just one building constructed from this same wood, and a tree-ring scientist from the University of New York, Edward Cook, and he says that the ship is a type of sailboat called a sloop, and it was likely built in a small shipyard in Philadelphia soon after the timber was harvested in 1773. Only 2 decades later, in the 1790s, it was deemed junk and the ship's remains were used as a landfill to extend the banks of the Hudson River and create more land in the forever swelling city that is New York. According to the tree-ring scientist Edward Cook, who says, what determined the exactness of the construction date of the ship was the use of tree-ring dating, which was only made possible by recovering the timber from the ship. And this really is, according to Edward Cook, the premier scientific method for dating structures made of wood. The method in dating relates to the way the trees grow. Each year, a tree lays down a new ring of wood around their trunk. In good years, when the tree grows well, the ring is wide, and in a bad year, the rings are narrow. And most of the time, scientists use this information to try to figure out how climate has changed over time in a particular area, so tree rings, some might say, record and tell time. In the case of the World Trade Center discovery, the ship was made of wood from hickory, spruce, pine and oak. But Edward Cook and his colleagues based their findings on the tree rings contained in planks of white oak, which were used to build the ship's frame. White oaks grow throughout eastern North America, but the scientists were able to narrow in on a more precise location because they already had the information on tree ring sequences in white oaks from North Carolina to Massachusetts. So all that was required was a comparison between those sequences and the tree ring sequences contained in the boat's timbers. And it turns out the same pattern of growth variability in the World Trade Center boat was found in timbers in southeastern Pennsylvania. And Edward Cook said there is no indication that timbers came from a more remote area. The oldest ring that they identified dated back to the late 1400s, during the time of Columbus's maiden voyage to the New World. And the youngest ring, laid down in the year the timber was harvested, dated to 1773, the same year that the Bostonians held their famous tea party. The later date not only tells us about when the wood was harvested, but also provides a window into the likely construction period. The area in Lower Manhattan where it was found was filled in the 1790s, but this ship's journey hasn't ended in Manhattan. After being excavated in 2010, it was taken to the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Laboratory, where Cook and his colleagues obtained these tree ring samples. And as of today, plans are said to be in the works to put this historical sailboat on display in a New York museum, where visitors can admire and explore the ship's short history to the significant find. From the ashes, roots have emerged. In the Zoroastrian tradition, Mithra was an all-seeing figure co-identified with the sun itself. No one knows why this occurs, but the answer can be realised in the Squatter Man question. Mithra of the shining light that beholds everything. According to the myth, Mithra was born bearing a torch and armed with a sword beside a sacred stream and under a sacred tree. The tree, of course, becomes a Squatter Man, and this context is telling us Mithra developed as a manifestation under the Tree of Life, and this is when the great god Ahura Mazda became flanked by the two. The Yasts are a collection of 21 hymns in the younger Avestan language, and each of these hymns invokes a specific Zoroastrian divinity or concept. The Avestan hymn to Mithra, Yast 10, is the longest and one of the best preserved of the Yasts. Mithra is described in the Zoroastrian Avestan scriptures as Mithra of wide pastures, of the 1,000 ears, and of the myriad eyes, the lofty and everlasting, the province ruler, the Yazad divinity of the spoken name, the Holy One. The Corda Avesta, the Book of the Common Prayer, also refer to Mithra in the Litany to the Sun. Homage to Mithra of wide cattle pastures, whose word is true, who is of the assembly, who has 1,000 ears, the well-shaped one, who has 10,000 eyes, the exalted one, who has a wide knowledge, the helpful one who sleeps not, the ever wakeful. We sacrifice to Mithra, the Lord of all countries, whom Ahura Mazda created, the most glorious of the supernatural Yazads. So may there come to us for aid both Mithra and Ahura, the two exalted ones. I shall sacrifice to his mace, well aimed against the skulls of the Devas. Some recent theories have claimed that Mithra represents the sun itself, but the Corda Avesta refers to the sun as a separate entity altogether, as it does with the moon, with which the sun has the best of friendships with the moon. According to the Corda Avesta, a pattern again emerges. Another ancient culture, one of the most ancient, tells us that the great god, whom shone brightest, is flanked by other gods, and that the sun and the moon are not part of this apparition. In the 1970s, an underground vaulted room near the port of Caesarea Maritima was discovered by a team of archaeologists, and this one was special. During the beginning of the 2nd century in the current era, AD, it was converted into the temple of the god Mithras by the Romans. This god, Mithras, originally worshipped as Mithra, was a recent import into the Roman world, but the mysterious cult rapidly acquired a vast popularity throughout the entire Roman Empire. Found from Egypt to England, from the Crimea to Portugal, and especially on the legion headquarters along the Roman borders. Most Mithria, as they are called, are underground or excavated in the rock, so as to represent the mythical abode in which the god manifested from plasmatic instabilities radiating in the sky. The rock grotto is to display where the god was seen, above the highest mountain in the arc of the sky, disappearing on the horizon as far as the eye could see. And they all look alike, these grottos. In the central niche is an altar supporting a relief with the central scene of the cult. Mithras stabs the primordial bull with a dagger, while some animals, a dog, a scorpion, and a snake take active part in the proceedings. And these are the animals of the earth, portrayed to describe death and chaos as plasma rained down from the figure in the sky. And while archaeologists were working on this discovery, they noted a shaft in the vault, from which sunlight shone at midday near the altar. As the days go by, the light rays come closer and closer to the altar, until it shone directly on the altar on June the 21st, the Summer Solstice. According to the philosopher Porphyry, who probably visited Caesarea in his youth and later married a Caesarean woman, the Mithrists believed that the soul entered the human body at birth and left it at death following the direction of the solstice. The Caesarea Mithraeum was then a faithful representation of the mythical cosmos. In addition to this, the direction of the sunset in the summer solstice, as seen from Caesarea, has an extraordinary property. It passes almost exactly through the small island of Delos in the Aegean Sea, the legendary birthplace of Apollo, and through Delphi, the famous Apollonean oracular centre not far from Athens. Further on, and strikingly, it passes through an impressive string of ancient cultic places devoted to the Archangel Michael. San Michele del Gargano, Tempio di San Michele in Perugia, San Galgano, Sarca de San Michele della Chiusa, Mont Saint Michel, St Michael's Mount, Skellig Michael, and others. In fact, in ancient Christianity, Michael was often invoked and worshipped in places where Mithraea have been found, as in Sutri, Heidelberg, Riegel, and many others. Michael killing the dragon and protecting the souls serves much the same function as Mithra's killing the bull and giving directions to the souls entering and leaving mortality. Is Saint Michael and Mithra one and the same thing? The creation of the world is the central episode of Mithraic mythology. According to the myths, the sun god sent his messenger, the raven, to Mithra and ordered him to sacrifice the bull. Mithra executed the order reluctantly, and in many reliefs he is seen turning aside his face in sorrow. But at the very moment of the death of the bull, a great miracle happened. The white bull was metamorphosed into the moon. The cloak of Mithra was transformed into the vault of the sky, with the shining planets and fixed stars. From the tail of the bull, and from his blood sprang the first ears of grain and the grape, and from the genitals of the animal ran the holy seed which was received by the mixing bowl. And it is said that every creature on the earth was shaped with an admixture of the holy seed. One Mithraic hymn begins, "Thou hast redeemed us too by shedding the eternal blood." The plants and the trees were created. Day and night began to alternate. The moon started her monthly cycle. The seasons took up their round dance throughout the year. And thus, time as we know it was created. But then, awakened by a sudden light, the creatures of the dark emerged on the earth. The serpent licked the bull's blood. A scorpion tried to suck the holy seed from the genitals. On these reliefs, a lion is often also seen. With the bull's death and the creation of the world, the struggle between good and evil began. Thus is the condition of human life. The raven symbolises air, the lion fire, the serpent the earth, and the mixing bowl water. So the four elements, air, fire, earth and water, came into being, and from them all things were created, whom emerged from the dark. After the sacrifice, Mithra and the sun god banqueted together. Then Mithra mounted the chariot of the sun god and drove with him across the ocean, through the air, to the end of the world. What did the Romans know exactly about the Zoroastrian ancient god? You see, these similarities between cultures and religious division acts as a bridge to the previous associations. The exact point from the Zoroastrian tradition may not have been lost to the Romans, as it is to us now. Mithra is depicted in the Roman tradition as slaying the bull, treading on the beasts of the earth. The witnesses must have thought that they had been spared, hence the association with sparing the soul. The witnesses were simply protected from their vantage, because this event was indiscriminate and it assimilates over time into the Christian tradition. And it's possible that the figure of Mithra assimilates to Michael the Archangel, whom is like God in the Bible, and in the Bible, Michael is the only one identified as an archangel.
What if we were to tell you that from Israel to Ireland, a line exists that marks monasteries and other places of worship dedicated to the Archangel Michael? What if we were to tell you that this represents a straight line, the path of the ancient sun? What else to mark out landmark structures in a straight line right across Europe, the Middle East? A celestial object once took this path, and for that reason, Earthlings living in that path would erect these structures in such a way that it came directly in the path of worship. But Saint Michael is the assimilated figure of the god Mirtha, and in the Zoroastrian faith, it was Mirtha whom was like the god Ahura Mazda, and Mirtha, or Saint Michael as he was known as in the Christian tradition, appeared next to the Taurus field. He is one of the two whom flanked the great figure in the sky. In Roman times, the cult of Mirtha spread to these locations and assimilates to Saint Michael directly. The places where the Romans worshiped Mirtha are now places of the archangel Michael. Mirtha, Michael, was said to be like God and endowed with some of God's power. This tells us that at these locations, the plasmatic instability becomes the apparition of Michael or Mirtha to the Zoroastrians. In the Apocalypse by the Apostle John, it was written that a dragon with 7 crowned heads and horns, and a tail that swept aside the stars, threatened the Virgin Mary and her newly born child. Mary and Jesus, or Isis and Horus, were the immaculate conceptions perceived in the manifestation of the Taurus instability. The 7-headed dragon is a dragon to the Chinese, but for the Jews this was the menorah. Funnily enough, the ancient Chinese symbol for the dragon directly represents the Jewish tradition of the menorah. Saint Michael and his angels fought the serpent from Satan and destroyed it before restoring order. Apophis, the serpent of Egypt, has been identified with Tiamat, the great dragon of Sumerian traditions, slain by Marduk. This primordial goddess is also the prototype of the biblical monster Leviathan, and these perceptions are the instabilities in the sky described by an ancient observer in the Squatterman manifestations. The St. Michael's line shows us a path of an ancient apparition. It assimilates from civilization to civilization. Names change over time, but overall understanding remains even into modern times. But the scenario in the myth has been lost to history. These clear signs on the landmark shows us the path of one of the figures that flanked the squatter man in the sky. Is it a coincidence that these great figures fight the dragon, the serpent, the devil? These are simply descriptions of plasma raining onto the earth, and the devil must be set to the Egyptians when Osiris is separated by these figures as perceived by ancient observers.
What religious scriptures tells us about the squatter man? All of them? Yes, all of them. And especially in the Zoroastrian tradition, can these stories of the past be forever synonymous with the great event in the sky, as detailed in petroglyphs all around the world. The oldest religion today tells us of the same story, which assimilates over time, only they tell us more detail that becomes lost later on. For example, according to the Zoroastrian creation myth, Gaelmat was the first human, or more specifically, and according to the Avesta, he was the first person to worship Ahura Mazda. According to Britannica, in Zoroastrian creation literature, the first man and the progenitor of mankind, Gaelmat's spirit, with that of the primeval ox, lived for 3,000 years during the period in which creation was only spiritual. His mere existence immobilised Ahriman, the evil spirit who wanted to invade creation. Then Ahura Mazda created Gaelmat incarnate, white and brilliant, shining like the sun, and put him and the primeval ox alone of all things created. A seed whose origin was in fire. Ahura Mazda gave Gaelmat the boon of sleep for respite from the onslaught of Ahriman. But after 30 years of attacks, Ahriman destroyed Gaelmat. His body became the earth's metals and minerals. Gold was his seed, and from it sprung the human race. A concise story of Gaelmart, according to the Middle Persian text, is given by Zabahola Safa, who is a scholar and professor of Iranian studies at the University of Tehran, and his details are as follows. Gaelmart, Gar Shah, King of the Mountains, was the first human Ahura Mazda created. Before Gaelmart came in the 5th Ga, Ahura Mazda created the world in 6 Gas. Gavegvag Dat, the primordial ox, had been created from mud in Iran Vejd, which was the middle of the earth. On the right side of the river Vedet, in the 6th Ga, Gaelmart was created from mud. The manifestation now appears as God flanked by the two. And they lived for 3,000 years in peace, neither eating, speaking, nor praying, although Gaelmart was inwardly considering these things. At the end of this 3,000-year period, during which Ahriman lay stunned by Ahura Mazda's Ahuna War incarnation and could do nothing, Je, the demonic whore, cried out, awakening him, whereupon Ahriman and his minions, the Devs, fought with delight. And in the first day of spring, which coincides with the Iranian New Year, Ahriman leapt forth onto the earth in the form of a dragon. The plasmatic instabilities begin to affect the Earthlings. Out of this destruction, life again would eventually flourish. He started to create death, illness, lust, thirst and hunger among all living things, and decimated throughout the world the Krim, the class of evil creeping things which includes reptiles, insects and rodents. In the catastrophe, Gavegag Dat died, this being also the symbol of the old year, giving way to the new. As depicted in Persepolis reliefs, and Ahriman left Asovidat Adiv to guard Gaelmart, but could not kill him because his time had not yet come. He lived for 30 years afterward, and when finally he died, he fell upon his side and shed his semen upon the ground, which was then fertilised by the new sun. It's clear that Gaelmart is part of the manifestation radiating from the great god Ahura Mazda, the planet Saturn. And these stories are the witness to what was seen. It's a testament to what is seen on the petroglyphs, and these stories tell us the tale which can be seen on petroglyph sites all around the world. It wasn't a god in the sky, in the sense that it wasn't this physical being that is being described. It's the torus field that looked like a humanoid, and all our perceptions today are related to this event. Gaelmart, along with Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, must then be one of the planets in the solar system interacting with the plasmatic instabilities and appearing to the Earthlings as a figure in the sky beside the great god. And this was the manifestation in the Squatterman instability. Open up your eyes and you will see that religion holds more answers than you could ever have imagined. It holds answers, but it also blinds us. Faith is the final frontier, and the Squatterman phenomena is the key to understanding the past events that affected the ancient Earthlings so dramatically that we hardly even question the mythology of our existence today. To begin to see with your own eyes, you must first check out Anthony Peratt and David Talbot. These two researchers are almost solely responsible for some of the most eye-opening connections that are still being shunned in the education systems. Once you see for yourself the connections between the petroglyphs and the Z-pinch, the first man, the Adam, the column of light that manifested into the great figure in the sky and inspired every religious observation story from Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to the menorah. The great figure manifested over millennia. Auroral instabilities merry-danced in the sky discreetly as people observed far and wide. And as they observed, They remembered by telling the stories of what was seemingly taking place in the sky, and the stories of the gods across all world civilizations matched discreetly in the detail. And this, of course, is because Earthlings were overwhelmed by this figure in the sky, which descended into chaos as planets exchanged plasma in the heavens, and to the Earthlings, this was the gods waging war with one another. David Talbot describes in the Saturn Myth our flawed understanding of the cosmic mountain, whom the great god ruled over the whole earth, and each civilization on the earth point to their own highest peaks as this cosmic abode. And the thought of the half-man, half-sea creature is inspired where mountains aren't present, and instead they thought he lived in the sea because that's where he descended. According to David Talbot, the few mythologists who discuss the cosmic mount at all tell us that it is a metaphor for the world axis. The axis of the turning heavens is like a mountain reaching from the earth to the celestial pole or the pole star. According to the mythologists, by imagining a great pillar as the support and axle of the universe, the ancients possessed a simple explanation for the observed motions of the heavenly bodies. To begin to evaluate this interpretation of the mythical mountain, one must ask how well it accounts for all aspects of the tradition. In the myths, the mountain appears as a column of light, often constituting the universal monarch's lower limbs, or the single leg, as it is in many cases. United to the pillar, the God King becomes a heaven-sustaining giant, and the myths also express the mountain as a cosmic serpent, whose body forms the serpentine trunk of the great Pharaoh. In many other traditions, the pillars appears as a vertical stream of life, the ether, the wind, breath or waters either coursing down the world axis or rising along the axis to be dispersed in four streams, animating the celestial kingdom. Saturn, the central sun, enthroned within the polar enclosure, ruled from the mountain atop. David Talbot best judges these metaphorical explanations of the cosmic hill by placing himself in the position of an ancient observer, and assuming that if he looked upon the same heavens which we see today, would it look the same? Noticing that the stars of the circumpolar region slowly swing around a central point, he realised that a line from that polar pivot through the earth serves as an invisible axle around which the sun, the moon and all other stars revolve. Starting from this perception, first he must decide, in contradiction to his observations, that this axis is not an invisible column, but a vertical pillar of fire and light. He must conclude also that a stationary sun rests, or once rested, atop the shining pillar, again in contrast to actual observations. David Talbot has identified that this central sun was not the blazing solar orb of today, but rather the planet Saturn. And although this remote and unimpressive planet today never approaches the solar region, it must have done in ancient times. And all ancient mythologies and symbols point this fact out. It also occurred to David Talbot that Saturn, as king of the mountain, resides, or at least once resided, within a great band, divided by four primary streams. And finally, David Talbot concluded that in primeval times, Saturn ruled at the summit as the creator, the first king, the first man, presiding over paradise of unlimited abundance. David Talbot further asserts that to arrive at the complete mythical image of the cosmic mountain, our hypothetical conjecturists must not only heap one conjecture upon another, but also refuse to accept direct observations at each stage. At what value, religious, psychological or otherwise, is a fiction which flatly contradicts the phenomena it is intended to explain? And cynics may say that primitives are capable of conjuring any force imaginable to explain something they do not understand, but the hypothetical case of the squatter man does not require the primitive observer simply to invent explanations for things observed. It requires him to deny immediate experience, and yet to compose a grand vision sufficiently persuasive to acquire hypnotic powers over the ancient world. The Saturn myth, along with Anthony Peratt's observations, proves religion has wrongly controlled the earthlings. The belief in our faiths are born of catastrophic fear inflicted when the sun of the golden period manifested. When the column of light became broken, the tree evolved. Adam and Eve are perceived amongst thousands of other observations that reach us today as myth. Of course, the mass of available evidence argues against any such inventiveness on the part of early man. Yet these difficulties vanish once we free ourselves from the doctrine of cosmic uniformity and consider whether our primitive observer may have actually witnessed the strange forces which ancient records describe in such detail. And the cosmic mountain is only one ingredient in an integrated cosmology which seems to have prevailed over the entire ancient world. May not, in fact, the mythical mount, the central sun, the polar enclosure and crossroads, focusing on the celestial image, speak for powers which were really there? Of course it does. Religion assimilates into our time from the Egyptian times, and it seems that the Greeks and Romans tried to re-establish the order of control that swept over civilization at this time. But the Egyptians didn't fully recover from the Bronze Age collapse when Santorini erupted. And if you consider that Mary and Jesus may be related to the figures of Isis and infant Horus, then you can see how this assimilates into our time. It's the biggest truth you are ever likely to realise, and we of course invite you to check out the Squatter Man project, inspired by Kronos, Anthony Peratt and David Talbot amongst many others. But what do you guys think about this anyway? Comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.